Chapter 3 of Pee Wee Harris Adrift. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. Pee Wee Harris Adrift by Percy Keese Fitzhugh. Chapter 3 Castles in the Air. The loneliness of Robinson Crusoe on his desert island was nothing compared to the loneliness of Pee Wee on that Saturday morning. He might have attached himself to any of the 3 patrols and had a day's pleasure, but his pride had stood in the way. He had always been something of a freelance in the troop and been regarded as a troop institution, but there had always been his official place among the ravens waiting for him whenever it suited his wanton fancy to return like a prodigal to the fold. Now, in the pleasant springtime, with the troop divided for the summer rivalries, he found himself quite isolated. No one was to blame for this. A scout must be in one patrol or another, and if all patrols are full, then he must make himself the nucleus of a new one. That is what Mr. Ellsworth had told Pee Wee. Gee whiz! Nucleuses aren't so easy to be, that's one thing, Pee Wee muttered to himself as he bent his aimless way in the direction of Barrel Alley. Maybe he thinks it's easy to be a nucleus. Nucleuses are hard to be. I'll tell the world. Anyway, I can be a pioneer scout, that's one thing. You don't have to be a nucleus or anything to be one of those. You don't have to bother with patrols. They don't. They're lucky. He ambled along, kicking a stone before him in a disconsolate, disgruntled way. He followed it wherever it went, ever and again kicking it back onto the sidewalk. The simple pastime seemed to afford him infinite relief. And meanwhile glowing visions arose in his mind, such visions as no one but a poet or a lonely boy on a Saturday morning in the springtime could possibly have. No one had injured him in the least. He was liked by all. He was simply the unhappy victim of circumstances. But in a mood of heroic retaliation against the troop, he pictured himself as a pioneer scout, residing aloof in a grim tower, surrounded by wireless apparatus and covered with merit badges. Scouts from all over the world would make pilgrimages to his obscure retreat for a timid glimpse of the mysterious hero. The glowing vision was somewhat marred by his conception of himself eating a huge sandwich as he looked down from his parapet upon the worshipping throng below. Roy Blakely would be down there among the others, his jollying propensity subdued by a feeling of awe as he gazed at the great scout Hermit, the famous pioneer scout who sent messages to lesser scouts the world over. They would whisper, "He looks just like his pictures in Boy's Life," and he would smile down on them and plunk. The pioneer scout had collided with a man on the sidewalk, and he returned to Bridgeboro with a suddenness that surprised even himself. "Excuse me," he said. "Certainly," said the man. Pee Wee recovered his rock and began kicking it along the sidewalk again. "I'll show them," he said moodily. He was about to ascend his scout throne again and engage in the gracious pastime of receiving delegations of common, ordinary scouts in his dim, wooded domain, when he found himself at the edge of a region which was not in the least like the romantic wilderness of his vision. This was Barrel Alley, the habitat of Jimmy Mattenberg and Sweet Caporal and the McNulty twins. Barrel Alley was the slum neighborhood of Bridgeboro, and it was not very large. But it was large enough. Pee Wee explored the crooked, muddy, sordid street, gazing wistfully here and there for possible recruits, but no human material was to be seen. The older boys were playing craps in Denahan's lot, and the smaller boys were watching them. One lonely sentinel was perched on the fence, scanning the horizon for cops. For this he received the regular union pay of a stale apple core. He was an unkempt urchin with an aggressive and challenging countenance. But he had solved several problems in economy. One of these was the entire elimination of stockings and garters. This was accomplished by the use of a pair of trousers with legs of such ample diameter and of such length as to render stockings altogether superfluous. This released both garters for more important duties, they being tied end to end, thus contributing a sort of single-strand suspender, which, at its junction with his trousers in front, was securely held by a large nail. His hair presented an appearance not unlike the negligent architecture of an eagle's nest, which is of the bungalow type in its loose irregularity. He had not the slightest reason for supposing that Pee-wee was equipped with commissary stores. But on general principles, he said, "Give us a hunk of candy, will yer?" As luck would have it, this random shot fired at every strange boy from the upper world hit the mark, to his unspeakable astonishment. Pulling out of his pocket a licorice jawbreaker of vast dimensions, Pee-wee sent it shooting in a bee-line at the face of the stranger. Never before in all his checkered history had Kiki Joe ever received any edible of any character whatever in response to his menacing demands. He had always assumed that boys who were well dressed had fruit or candy in their pockets. He had sometimes required them to verify their denials by an exhibition of the interior of these receptacles. His invariable demand had become a habit with him. Therefore, the little sugared black brick which now hit him in the eye came as an unprecedented surprise. For a moment he did not know whether to construe it as a propitiatory gift or a warlike missile. "What's the matter with you? Can't you catch?" Pee-wee demanded. End of Chapter 3. Recording by John Brandon.